swear you guys keep sneaking up on me like that, you're gonna get shot. I didn't even see you till I started heading down that hill. I'm getting ready to go out for a hike though. I don't know if you guys want to come along. I'm gonna probably talk a little bit about wild edibles because spring is coming and I got wild edibles on the brain and a few other things. Basically just a ramble and a hike through the woods of southeast Michigan. So if you want, stick around, go for a hike here. Coming. Well, you guys did manage to follow me. I didn't think you came. I looked back and I didn't see you, so I figured you decided to stay. Now, I said this walk was gonna contain some wild edibles, but oh, you know what? Here's some right at your feet. Garlic mustard. These are really good for a sour stomach. Bitter greens. And they're fresh as ever. Eat 3 or 4 or 5 of those and at least for me it cures heartburn and sour stomach. But since you did decide to come along, I figured I'd bring up, I don't mention it too often, but your public library is a pretty good resource for wild edible books, books on ethnobotany, bushcraft survival, you name it. Your public library probably has it. Some of the books might be outdated, but they still contain useful information, and you can get a lot of good tidbits of information from those old books that you simply won't find on the internet. I'm gonna keep heading down the trail here. If you guys want to come, just follow along or whatever. Or blaze your own trail. Oh, hey. How'd you guys get in front of me? I know some of you stayed back there and didn't come, but you must have cut around or something. This isn't so much an edible, but this is the small last year's growth of the quaking or trembling aspen tree. And you can tell it's last year's growth because the bark will be darker than the other bark, and it will be the very tips with the buds on them. Chew on those twigs and eat those little buds, and it's a good pain reliever. But that brings up another good point, and I see it being blown out of proportion on the internet all the time, so I figured it'd be a good time to mention it. A lot of people seem to think that because a medicine is natural or herbal, that it is somehow 100% safe for you to take it. And that's just not the case. You have to be careful how much you take. You also have to make sure that you're not going to be allergic to it. If you're a pregnant woman, there's certain plants and stuff that you shouldn't eat. Just like store-bought medicines, you know, there's certain stuff that you're just not supposed to eat if you're allergic to it, or if you're pregnant or nursing, or if you have some other health disorder. So you need to keep that in mind. And I'm finding more and more that modern doctors and modern medicine is starting to get a better understanding of these natural herbs, and they're actually doing some research on them. And a lot of doctors now, they do know about these medicines and the interactions they can have with other drugs you're taking. So talk to your doctor about it, you know. Don't feel that you need to run off in the wilderness and just willy-nilly experiment with this stuff and possibly hurt yourself. You know, talk to a professional and seek guidance about whether or not you can take that. We'll keep going down the trail and see what else we can find. Well, here's a nice buck rub on this small sapling tree. And this is actually a funnel point for deer right here, because we have water on that side and we have water on this side. So the normal travel, the deer is going to be funneled into this small area to cross this swamp. Only problem is this area is a human trail, and the deer knows that. So the only time you're going to find a deer on this trail is after dark, and where I live you can't hunt deer after dark. It's illegal. So even though there's a nice rub on that tree, you're never going to find a deer here in legal hunting hours. But what you can do, since you know that buck has been there, is you can follow his tracks. You can backtrack him and find out where he beds, and you can set up within 200 or 300 yards of his bedding area. You don't want to get too close to his bedding area because you'll spook him off and he'll leave the entire area. But if you get within maybe 300 yards of his bedding area, you might catch him getting up out of his bed before shooting hours ends, or in the morning, you know, as he's heading back to his bedding area. And you know, maybe on the other side of this swamp, somewhere on that ridge or something would be a good spot to set up. You'd have to, you know, you got to scope it out yourself and find out. But you know, just because you see a deer rub doesn't mean you're gonna be able to shoot a deer or harvest a deer in that area. Keep heading down this trail and see what else we see. Now, this is kind of neat. Little bitty pine, just getting started, and that would be a natural planting, I would assume. There's a stand of pines off in the distance, and this little pine must have somehow made it, its seed must have somehow made it over here from a red squirrel or who knows what, and now it's growing right here in the middle of this swamp. Kind of neat. Here's a neat plant to know. I haven't found a whole lot of uses for it. This here is horse tail, not to be confused with horse weed. Now, I've heard that the young spring shoots of this plant are edible, but I really don't know if that's true. Personally, I wouldn't eat it because this plant is known to contain a large amount of silica, but what that makes it good for is sort of a survival bushcraft sandpaper or steel wool. And what I've used it for, which it does work for, is getting the rust off your blade. Say you've been out in the woods for a while and you don't have any oil to lube your blade and it's getting a bit rusty. You can take this plant and squish it up like that and use it to scrape or essentially sand the rust off of your blade. And it does work for that. Oh, well, I got you here. This here is Boxelder. It's a maple, and this is a great time of year to know about maples because you can get purified drinking water from them, for one, if the daytime temperatures are above freezing, which they are today, and you can make maple syrup with them. Now, a lot of folks pass up the Boxelder tree because it's generally small in diameter and it takes more sap to make a gallon of maple syrup versus a sugar maple, but the Boxelders give off a lot more sap than sugar maples. They give it off sooner and they give it off for a longer period of time before it gets to the point where you can't use it. I know it's a maple because of Mad Dog. If you don't know what Mad Dog is, I have a video called Mad Dog and it explains it. But it has opposite branching, and based on the bark and the overall look of the tree, somewhat scraggly and small, I know it's a Boxelder, even though there's no leaves for me to see. I can determine that simply by the look of the bark, the overall structure of the tree, and the fact that it has opposite branching. It's a really good tree to know, and it grows all over the place. I mean, there's Boxelders all over here. Here's another small one. There's one back here behind it, and there's another little one right over there. Those will all put out drinkable water for you, and they do contain some sugar, so that's a source of carbohydrates too, and energy. Good plant to know. I know you guys have seen this coat a lot. Sometimes you see me wearing a fuzzy gray coat and sometimes this slick black coat. But it's a real nice coat for hunting and gathering because the gray coat and the black coat are one and the same. It's reversible. The gray is fuzzy and soft and silent, so it's really good for hunting. But that fuzz catches all those burrs and stuff, and it's not very good when it's a windy day. But this black doesn't get any burrs on it, and it makes a really good windbreaker too. So it's kind of nice. I can be out, and depending on the habitat I'm in, I can just flip this jacket around. It's really lightweight, so it's nice for long hikes, and it's got this collar that zips up around the neck, so it keeps me warm. And depending on the habitat I'm in, I can adjust it accordingly, and works really good. Now, I don't sponsor these guys or anything. I don't even know if they're around anymore, to be honest with you. This was a coat that I got from the Salvation Army, I believe. Somebody probably got it at a trade show or from their employer and just didn't like it. Or perhaps it was the wrong size. So they give it to the Salvation Army, and it was brand new. And I think it cost me a couple bucks. So whoever you are, thanks. Because to be honest with you, I don't have a lot of money to be spending on nice coats and stuff. And it sure helped me out. So thank you for donating to Goodwill and the Salvation Army and places like that. One big spruce tree. Look at that. One ready-made tinder nest. That looks like a bunch of cedar bark that was stripped off by some rodent and made into a little home, probably when there was snow here. There might even be some little mice down in there. I'd almost bet you there are. That'd make a great tinder nest, but you got to be careful with rodents because they carry all kinds of disease in their feces, and also, you know, they have fleas and stuff that can transmit disease too. So I personally wouldn't use that unless I was really desperate, because who knows what's in there. Besides, that's something's home. You get in those mature woodlands and there's not a lot in the way of wild edibles. You might be able to find some basswood buds or some beech tree buds or maple buds to munch on. You may be able to find some pine or spruce needles that you can make into tea. And in a real bad situation, you can eat the bark, the inner bark, actually the cambium layer of a lot of trees. But you know, that's more of really, you're just in a serious survival situation then. That's why it pays to know how to hunt and trap and stuff and fish. Because unless you can find some open areas with some fields, I mean, this is pretty good. There's probably some wild edibles back in here I could find to eat, burdock root or something along those lines. But other than that, you know, you're gonna need animals to eat or fish. It really pays to know how to hunt and trap and fish, especially if you were likely to get lost in a woodland environment, because there's not a lot in the way of plants you can eat, especially in late winter like this. In the fall it might be good because there's lots of nuts and stuff you can eat and berries. You could probably find some mushrooms and stuff throughout the summer and in the spring. But in the late winter, everything's dead. And the only thing you're gonna find is maybe some garlic mustard, pine needles, and a few tree buds or something to munch on. You get in a more open area like this where you start getting some some thick brush and briars and stuff. And not only can you find more wild edibles, but you can also find more animals and stuff to hunt. Animals generally don't prefer mature open forests. And the reason they don't is because there isn't much food available in those areas. There's not much food and there's not much shelter. And if you're a hunter, you that's almost like a second nature. It's stuff you already know because you've been hunting those animals your whole life. But if you're somebody that doesn't hunt, you know, you could spend a lot of time wandering around a mature forest hoping to see a rabbit or a deer, and you're never gonna see one. I mean, you will see them occasionally, but you really need the thick stuff where there is food available and shelter to hunt them up. And if you know about the habits of rabbits and deer and stuff, you know, if you were stuck in a situation, you'd have a much easier chance of securing some food via an animal without using a gun or a knife or even a snare for that matter. Because you can certainly catch rabbits with your bare hands if you know about their habits. See, this is really good shelter. All these pines and cedars, that's good browse for the animals in the wintertime, and it's good shelter from the snow, rain, and wind. And it's the same for you. Food and shelter. Yeah, there's definitely a deer back in there. I can feel it. These poplars get a white film on the side of the tree that's most exposed to the sun, which is typically the south side of the tree. Take your hand and rub it down there and you can see it comes right off. That is a natural sunblock, and it actually works really good. You could put that on yourself as a protectant from the sun. Now, it's not something I would do, but it's a good thing to know. I mean, if you're a person that has a tendency to burn easy, I don't burn easy. But this tree uses that sunblock as a preventative measure of budding out too soon. Because if the tree buds out too soon and you get a bad frost, it can kill the tree over time. So it puts this natural sunblock on the outside of it to keep those rays from penetrating and warming up the tree, fooling it into budding out too soon. It's something good to know. There's a lot of things you can find in nature that are useful for more than just wild edibles. I mean, there's all kinds of utility purposes for plants and stuff you find in the woods. That tree right there is a big tooth poplar. Because the leaves have big teeth. I showed that in another video. I got a video called Cottonwood Identification, and also you can see it in my Cottonwood Buds Balm of Gilead series of videos. Those poplars are all over throughout here. They're a medicine for aches and pains. They're a potential emergency food source, and you can use them as a sunblock. To keep yourself from getting a sunburn. People don't realize it. I never knew it until my uncle told me a long time ago that a deer's digestive system, once it gets cold and once they get to the point where they're not finding much food, their digestive system essentially shuts down, and if you feed them corn, they can't digest it, and it will sit in their stomach and rot or whatever, and it will actually kill the deer. It's something good to know if you're a hunter, or even if you're a person, because I see a lot of people that are non-hunters or even anti-hunters doing it. They put out corn for the deer in the wintertime thinking that they're helping them, when in fact they're killing them, because the deer will eat that corn after not having anything on their stomach, and it's too much for them. They can't digest it and they get sick and die. Well, I caught up to you once again. You guys are spread out all over this woods. Nice little stand of spruce here. I see you've come to, you must be here to take a break or something, eh? But I thought I'd mention one more thing. I consider myself more of a naturalist than anything. You know, I'm into bushcraft and survival and hunting and fishing and hiking and all that. But really, when it comes down to it, I'm an amateur naturalist. I like to find the big picture and look at things as a whole, rather than just focus on one particular area. I think that makes you more proficient in the woods, regardless of what you do. But it also allows you to get into the mind of animals, and it lets you realize real quickly that man really isn't designed to live in the wilderness the way animals do. We're just not designed for it. Bears hibernate in the wintertime. They shut down completely and go into hibernation. We can't do that. Deer, their stomach and stuff slows down. It goes into hibernation so that they don't need as much food to make it through the winter. And a lot of deer do starve in bad winters. They don't get much food. I think there's a big misconception that people have about living in the wilderness, that, well, if the animals can do it, then so can I. And certainly you can, but you can't do it the way the animals do it, because you're not designed to function that way. Unless you're like a rabbit and you can live in a small hole in the ground and come out and eat tree bark all winter long and just sustain on tree bark alone and roots and stuff, you're not going to make it. A rabbit is much smaller. It doesn't need as much food as you do. So it's good to keep that stuff in mind. You know, just because an animal eats a certain plant, or just because an animal can live out in the wild, it doesn't mean you can. And I don't know, I think there's people out there that, well, I was one of them. You know, I figured, hey, you know, if animals can live in the wild, then I should be able to live in the wild too. But it's just not the reality of the situation. Man has always had to have shelter of some sort, whether it be a cave or a little grass hut that he made, or a clay building or whatever, you know. And we're just not designed to cope with the elements and the struggles that animals are designed to cope with. An animal system is much stronger than a man's system. Something to keep in mind if you're planning on running off and living in the wilderness. It's going to be a pretty hard route. That's why man eats animals, because they're designed to live through winters, and they're designed to be able to live without much food. We're not, so we eat them. You know, I'm very much about eating wild edibles and eating a healthy, varied diet. But without meat in your diet, there is something missing. We're omnivores, which means we eat meat and vegetable, and anything else we can find and palate and digest without being poisoned. It's important to dress properly when you go out. You'll have a much more pleasant experience. You know, wear a coat like this that's smooth. You won't get covered in burrs that you have to painstakingly pick off when you get home. Wear some gravel guards like that on your boots and pant legs. You won't be covered in mud when you get home. Get you a nice wool boggin. Keep the heat from escaping out the top of your head, and you won't be freezing to death. You can find a nice inexpensive pair of boots. These boots were $12. They're, I believe, 3 or 4 years old. They're still fully functional. They're very lightweight, which means I can hike all day long through any kind of terrain. They're 100% waterproof now that I've waterproofed them using deer tallow. And with these gravel guards, they're just that much better. You know, a lot of guys say cotton kills, and I guess that might be true in some environments, but it's generally pretty wet here in Michigan. And it can be cold or hot, and I find cotton is the best base layer there is. I wear a Poly-Pro, an inexpensive military type Poly-Pro sweater or what have you, with a cotton t-shirt underneath that prevents static from building up. The cotton wicks the moisture away from my body. I wear cotton socks too. I mean, it would be a good idea to wear a nice pair of wool socks. I will give them that. But you know, I'm usually have my backpack with me. I can throw 3 or 4 pairs of cotton socks in there for the weight factor of 1 pair of wool socks, and I can switch them out throughout the day, so it's not that big a deal. I think a pair of wool socks would be a good bet, but really where I'm at, it can warm up in the day, and then my feet are sweating really bad if I wear wool socks, because I do have a pair of wool socks at home, but I rarely wear them unless it's extremely cold out, because my feet will end up sweating, and I'll get blisters wearing the wool socks, where I don't get blisters wearing just a regular thin pair of cotton socks and boots that have thin slate insulation. I believe a lot of folks pay lots of money for gear that hurts them more than it helps them, especially when it comes to boots. You know, I buy a pair of boots based on how lightweight they are, how waterproof and breathable they are, and also how economical they are. How well do they flex? These boots flex really good, man. I can walk 10-20 miles a day with these, even up in May when it's getting warm, and it's not a problem. And I wear cotton blue jeans all year long. If it gets real cold, I'll have a pair of Polypro long johns that match this Polypro shirt here. I'll put those on underneath this and I'll stay warm in pretty cold weather. And if it's worse than that, I got a pair of cotton long johns that I put on underneath the Polypros, because just like with this setup, that cotton prevents static buildup, which to me is very annoying, and it also keeps that sweat away from my body. Whereas if you're just wearing Polypro or some kind of plastic type material that doesn't breathe, that moisture just sits right against your body, and that alone will make it cold and uncomfortable. I think that's gonna wrap it up for the video. I'm getting a bit slowed down. I want to get out and do some serious hiking today, put on some miles. So I think I'm gonna put the camera away and get on down the trail. You guys are welcome to tag along, but you're gonna have to do that through some other miracle of technology or mind melding, because the camera's going bye-bye and I'm going hiking. Talk to you later. Thanks for watching. I saw you sitting here on this stump. You should have came along. I met what's his name down there by that fallen oak, and we found some garlic mustard. He was just about standing right on top of it. I didn't think any of you guys came along, and then when I got down to the other side, I met his buddy on the other side. He must have came around and cut us off, and we walked for a little ways and found a few things. And then when I was coming back up the other side here, I saw your friend over there by those spruces, and we sat and BS'd a little bit about living in the wild and stuff, and hiked on out together. But you should have came along. You missed it. We had a good time. Got a lot of good exercise, and you know, just got to get out and breathe some fresh air rather than sitting here like a bump on a log.